Ms. Albert, your husband has boxing experience, correct?
Yes.
He also has fighting experience from his training in the military, correct?
I don't know what fighting experience from the military means. I mean, he was in the Marine Corps. He was out of the Marine Corps in 1992.
But he had training through the Marine Corps and through the Boston Police Department with fighting and defensive tactics, correct?
I assume so.
Ms. Albert, you testified earlier that you left the waterfall around, I believe, 11:45. Is that correct?
No, I said I think closer to 12.
Okay. Could I show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 53? Your Honor, would I have permission to publish Exhibit 53?
Okay.
And Mr. Bates, if I could have you start the video at 5:14. If you could pause. This video?
No, I don't.
Do you see the woman that's in the lower quadrant? Do you recognize that individual at all?
I don't. It's still, I can't tell who that is.
I know this is not the best video, so I'll play a little bit more and see if you might be able to recognize it. You don't recognize who that individual is?
I mean, it could be me. I'm not sure. I can't really tell.
All right, so this is an instance where the video has to speak for itself, right?
Understood, Your Honor. You could play just for a little bit longer. You pause. Did you recognize the woman that just sort of walked forward?
Yes. Now seeing the coat, I recognize that it's me.
Thank you. And did you see what was in your hand when you walked by?
I don't.
You could play just a little bit more. Ms. Albert, do you see you appear to be holding something?
Yes.
What is that?
Looks like a can.
And what time is that video taken?
11:58.
So that would have been approximately the time that you were leaving the Waterfall Bar and Grill.
Yep.
You guys had a fun night. It looks like you kind of grabbed the White Claw. You're about to leave. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You testified earlier that you got home.
So can we turn the lights back on? And okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
Let me switch gears a little bit. You testified earlier that there are 4 cars that are usually parked in the driveway at 34th Avenue, correct?
Yes.
And you listed at least the make and model of about 3 of those vehicles.
Yep.
Do you recall that?
Yep.
You said there's a Cadillac that usually is parked in your driveway, there's a Ford Explorer, and there's a Ford Escape, correct?
Yep.
But you also said there's a 4th car. That's your husband's work vehicle.
Yes. Yep.
What type of car is that?
That's a Ford Edge.
A black Ford Edge.
Yes. Yep.
Is there a reason that you didn't want to state or commit to that in front of this jury when you originally testified?
No, there's no reason. I was just trying to think of all the different cars. We have 5 kids. We've had a lot of different vehicles. I was just saying it as I remembered it.
News coverage in this case has revealed the importance of a Ford Edge.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
In your mind, a Ford Edge has significance to this case, doesn't it?
Objection, Your Honor.
No, can you answer that? Does a Ford Edge have significance in this case to you?
I've heard it talked about. Yeah.
And what you've heard talked about is that an eyewitness saw.
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to stop you on that. The objection sustained.
Ms. Albert, you know there's significance to the Ford Edge, and that's the one
Objection,
thing
Your Honor.
that you did not mention in your initial testimony, correct?
So I'm going to allow that question. Can you answer that?
I just was trying to think of all the different makes and models. I did not purposely say that.
Okay. Where did your husband strike up? You testified earlier that you weren't sure exactly where Brian Higgins parked that night when he arrived at your house, correct?
Right.
And you said, I'm not sure, but then you gave a pretty vivid description about him being parked, you think, in front of the house by the mailbox facing away from your residence, correct?
Right. Yep.
Is that statement something that's from your personal recollection or for something that you've discussed with other witnesses in this case?
No, it's from my personal recollection of what I'm pretty sure I remembered. He pulled in first. He backed out so we could pull in, and then I'm pretty sure he pulled out and parked along the curb where the mailbox was.
So you haven't discussed that statement with any other witnesses in this case?
I don't remember. I don't think so.
You testified earlier that when you arrived at 34 Fairview, your son, Brian Albert Jr. was there, Julie Nagel was there, Sarah Levinson was there, and that your nephew, Colin Albert, was also present, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe sort of your interaction with Colin Albert when you walked in the door?
It was literally, I was coming in. I think we almost bumped into each other. I said, I didn't realize he was there. I said, hey, what are you doing here? He said, oh, I just come by to see Brian, but my ride's on its way. I'm about to leave. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, all right, I see you. And he just kind of continued on. I think he must have went out the door.
So when you first testified, I believe you stated that you saw Colin seated at the table with Brian Jr., correct?
When I testified when?
Earlier today.
I don't believe I said
And
that.
shortly after he got up.
No, I don't believe I said that.
You never said that he was initially seated with Brian Jr.
No, I'm pretty sure I said when I walked in, I immediately saw him.
So when you walked in the door, you're saying he was already leaving to go get his ride, correct?
He was standing and looked to me like he was getting ready for someone who was coming to pick him up.
Got it. And when you pulled up with Brian Higgins and Brian Albert, that all happened around the same time, correct?
Yes.
And you have never mentioned seeing any other vehicle waiting outside the house for Colin when you arrived, correct?
No.
You didn't observe another vehicle outside the house.
No, I'm not saying he said to me, my ride's almost here. I'm leaving. So I didn't see anything outside about his ride.
And it was cold outside that night?
Yeah.
So he sort of walked out the door before his ride arrived?
I don't know if he went and stood and waited by the door. I came in the house, and like I said, I immediately said hello to my son, his friends. I went and started doing my cleaning, and I didn't really pay attention. But I assume he left because I never saw him again.
So you're not sure if he was sort of standing by the front door?
I'm not sure. I mean, he could have been standing there waiting. He said his ride was about to be there.
Okay. But you didn't see him leave?
I did not see him leave.
You testified that your German Shepherd, Chloe, was also at the house when you arrived home on January 29th, correct?
Yes.
She's a large German Shepherd.
Yep, about 70 pounds.
She's not great with strangers.
I wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't say that it's kind of a poorly worded question. Would you say that she's good with strangers?
I'd say she's fine with strangers.
Fine with strangers. Okay.
Yep.
She's definitely not good with other animals, is she?
No, she did not like other dogs.
Chloe actually has a well-documented bite history, doesn't she?
Objection.
Does she?
With dogs. A couple dogs, yes.
Ms. Albert, she also has a bite history with humans, doesn't she?
Objection.
Ask that differently.
Ms. Albert, Chloe has injured other humans, hasn't she?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that.
In one incident in May of 22, when she got out and was fighting with another dog, the woman whose dog it was tried to break up the two dogs, and while she was trying to break up the two dogs, she got injured.
There were actually two individuals who were injured in that incident, correct?
Well, there was two women, but I believe just one woman, from what I understand, had an injury from Chloe. The other one may have fallen or something, but I'm not sure 100%.
There were two women who were actually taken to the hospital after that incident, correct?
Yes, a neighbor had called the police, or called an ambulance just to make sure they were okay.
And you mentioned that Chloe had actually escaped from the backyard
Mm-hmm.
in that incident.
Yes.
And that happens from time to time in your house, correct?
It had happened a few times, yes.
And Mr. Albert let Chloe out when he arrived that night, correct?
Yep.
Ms. Albert, you don't have Chloe anymore, do you?
Nope.
In May of 2022, 4 months after Mr. O'Keefe's death, you got rid of your family dog of 6 years.
Objection.
Oh, is that true? Is that when you got rid of your dog?
I did not get rid of my dog. I rehomed my dog.
Your dog is no longer in the Canton area, correct?
No, but I know where she is. She's in Vermont. And in previous testimony, that information has all been given. So if she was ever needed for anything, we know where she is.
Was that testimony given to the defense?
Probably.
Was I present at the hearing where you testified about this?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Your Honor, can we approach?
Sure. Ms. Little, maybe you can clarify that.
Sure. May I approach?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like you to take a look at page 2. And you don't need to read it out loud. But if you could read this very last paragraph here.
Down hit 7? Or
Actually, this section right here,
Okay.
the second paragraph to the bottom. You don't need to read it out loud. Just look up once you're done.
And are you going to clarify that, Ms. Little? Statement?
Oh, how can I approach, Your Honor?
D-
Ms. Albert, this is just a police report containing an interview that's conducted, correct?
Yep.
With Sergeant Lank on January 29th. Is that right?
yes, the morning of.
Thank you. Have you had a chance to?
Yes,
is
yeah.
Your recollection, excuse me, is your recollection refreshed?
Yep.
Isn't it true that you told Sergeant Lank that your daughter left at 12:15 on January 29th?
I do not recall saying that. I've maintained in every interview testimony I've had that she was the last to leave. So I don't know. It was very confusing that morning. Officer Lank was trying to ask everybody, where had you been? Where had you been? When did you get here? When did you leave? I don't know if somehow it was misconstrued, but I've always maintained that Caitlin was the last to leave.
Understood. And that's because Sergeant Lank was talking to everyone at the same time, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we're sitting around the table. It was a little, everyone was, we're all in shock, and it was a little confusing.
Sure. It was more of a conversation than an interview. Is that right?
I guess you could say that.
May I approach?
Yes.
Ms. Albert, do you saying that to Sergeant Lang?
I don't believe I said that. I think maybe someone was saying, oh, Jen and Matt got there at 12:15. He misunderstood. It got misconstrued later in his notes. But I've always said, and any other time I was questioned, that my daughter was the last one to leave. So I don't,
So you weren't trying to protect your daughter.
no.
You were forthcoming about always providing the troopers with information about the individuals who were present that night.
Yes.
Ms. Albert, you and your family discussed this case at length before your interviews with law enforcement, correct?
Objection.
I'll allow it. Did you?
Of course, we discussed the case, but just everything that was going on, we were trying to figure out what happened.
And you testified that you spoke to Trooper Proctor on February 3rd, 2022. Is that correct?
Yes.
That would be 6 days after this occurred. Is that right?
Yep.
And that's the very first time that you were ever interviewed by Massachusetts State Police.
Yes.
Correct?
Yep.
Aside from that sort of conversation you described with Sergeant Lang.
Yeah. Yep.
When you spoke to Trooper Proctor on February 3rd, 2022, you left a lot of names out of individuals who were present at your house on the morning of January 29th, 2022. Isn't that correct?
I'm not sure who was left out.
Did you tell Trooper Proctor that your son, Brian Albert Jr., was home that night?
Was home the night of his birthday, or what do you mean?
Yes, the night of his birthday.
Well, yeah, he was home with his friends.
Did you tell that to Trooper Proctor?
I assume I did.
So if it wasn't in his report, that would have been his mistake?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did you tell Trooper Proctor your daughter, Caitlin Albert, returned home with you after the waterfall?
I believe so.
Did you tell Trooper Proctor that your son had 2 female friends at your house when you arrived?
I believe so.
And notably, did you tell Trooper Proctor that Colin Albert was present at your house?
You know, I probably didn't, because anytime I was questioned about who was there, to me it was who was there afterwards, hanging out from like the 12:15 point on. I didn't consider Colin as being there because I literally crossed paths with him. He left, and I didn't consider him being a part of the group that was there.
Were you asked who was at the house that night?
I assume he asked that, but I also didn't mention the girls, the people that my son had previous, because I didn't consider them as part of the people that I was with when I got home.
You never mentioned Colin Albert to Trooper Proctor, correct?
Correct.
And you never mentioned Colin Albert to Sergeant Lang.
Correct.
Ms. Albert, you knew that if you gave Trooper Proctor the name of your nephew, that he would have to interview him, correct?
Objection.
All right, I'm going to sustain that objection.
You didn't want your kids or your nephew to have to tell the police what they saw, what they heard, and what they did that night.
Objection.
I'm going to allow that. Is that true?
That is not true.
But you never told Trooper Proctor about Colin Albert.
I didn't mention Colin because I didn't consider him as part of the group that we were hanging out with after the waterfall, because he left as soon as I walked in. I didn't even think of him.
Didn't even think of him.
No.
Didn't think it might be important for the state trooper who was investigating this case to know the individuals who were leaving at the precise time that Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed arrived at the house.
Objection.
Sustained.
Ms. Albert, what's the first thing you remember waking up to on the morning of January 29th?
My sister bombing into my bedroom.
Okay. Your Honor, if we could approach.
Or identification.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Albert, I'd like to show you this photograph which purports to be.
Just show her the photograph.
Ms. Albert, do you recognize that photograph?
Yep.
What is it?
It's a picture of my house.
Does it appear to be generally to scale?
Yep.
Do you recognize sort of the flagpole in the yard,
Yes.
the house,
Yep.
the driveway?
Mm-hmm.
And that looks
Yes.
accurate. And that looks accurate in terms of scale, correct?
Yes.
Permission to publish?
Sure.
Ms. Albert, where is your bedroom located?
You want me to show it?
Yes, if you could explain.
Right up here.
So your bedroom is in that upper left-hand quadrant, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The far left window, that's your bedroom window.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep. The two of them.
So on January 29th, you had 2 bedroom windows on the left side of the house that were facing the front lawn where Mr. O'Keefe's body was found, correct?
Yes.
You're aware that Ms. Reed, Jennifer McCabe, and Carrie Roberts arrived outside your property around 6:04 a.m., correct?
Yes.
Did you hear any fire trucks that morning?
I did not.
Did you hear any ambulances?
I did not.
You didn't see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles outside your bedroom window?
I did not. My blinds were shut and my curtains were closed. I did not see anything.
You testified the very first thing you remember was Jennifer McCabe waking you up in your bedroom.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, just to keep track, are we going to take this down now, Miss Little? Or we can keep the lights on? I just want to keep track of that.
Yes, ma'am,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
What time was that?
I thought it was somewhere between 6 and 6:30.
Can I have a moment?
Sure.
told you it was around 6:45 based on video surveillance footage. Would you quarrel with that?
If that's what you say.
Okay. Does that sound about right to you?
Yep. I initially from the beginning just said 6:30. I wasn't quite sure.
Ms. Albert, what about the two calls that you received from your sister at 6:07 and 6:08 a.m., which were answered?
I never answered any phone calls from my sister that morning.
You're aware that the Cellbrite records indicated that you answered two calls from your sister.
Objection, Your Honor.
At 6:07 and 6:08 a.m.
The objection sustained.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Okay.
You could take a look at this report. Ms. Albert, you received
If I could just see what's being shown to the witness before. Thank you. May we approach?
Okay. With this, okay?
Ms. Albert, do you recognize this document?
Recognize it?
Do you know what it is?
Well, yeah. I see what it is.
Does it refresh your recollection as to the two calls you received on the morning of January 29th?
It says here 2 calls were placed.
Okay, don't read it, but you were asked a specific question. So if you could answer the question, please.
Does that refresh your recollection to the two calls you received from your sister on the morning of January 29th?
She may have placed those phone calls to me, but I never answered them.
You received a call from Jennifer McCabe on January 29th at 6:07:42 a.m. that lasted for 9 seconds, correct?
She may have placed a phone call to me. I never answered it. I never spoke to her that morning.
You also received a second call from your sister at 6:08:17 a.m. that lasted for 7 seconds, correct?
Objection.
Go ahead and answer that.
It says that, but I never answered a phone call from my sister Jennifer that morning.
You're aware that cell phone companies have what are called tolling records, correct? That show if there's a voicemail or something of that nature.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Ms. Albert, it's your testimony here today that you never spoke to your sister that morning.
I never spoke to my sister on the phone that morning.
Who else was in your bedroom that morning?
Me and my husband.
You and Brian Albert were the only two individuals who could have answered those calls that morning, correct?
We're the only 2 people in the room, besides the dog.
And at 6:07 a.m., someone had a 9-second call with Jennifer McCabe, correct?
Objection.
All right, sustained. And you've got more for this witness, I imagine, Ms. Little?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so we'll take the luncheon recess, folks. It's 1 o'clock. All right, Ms. Little, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, before we start, Exhibit S, which was marked for identification, I believe the proper foundation is laid. I'd ask
So let's not do that from there. Let me see it, please.
Sure.
Do we have S? S is in Sam or X?
Identification.
S is in Sam?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. Oh, wasn't it?
Why don't you come to sidebar, folks?
Your Honor, the parties have stipulated that Exhibit X is a graphic representation of 34 Fairview,
Yeah, not a photo.
not a photograph.
Okay, sure. Now you can approach the witness if you. Oh, you just want to put it into evidence now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So that will be our next exhibit. Madam Court Reporter? Thank you.
We actually need it.
May I approach?
Yes.
Ms. Albert, you testified that Jennifer McCabe woke you up around 6:45 a.m., correct?
I believe I said between 6 and 6:30, but could have been
That
6.
was what woke you up, correct?
Yes.
She obviously had access to the house.
Yes.
The door wasn't locked.
Nope.
That's sort of a typical practice for you.
Yeah, it was just sometimes with the kids, the last one in supposed to lock it. They didn't, it just wasn't always locked.
And inside your house, you had plenty of blankets and other items that could have been comfort to a man laying in the snow, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor.
So as to that form, I'm going to sustain the objection. You can ask the question a different way, Ms. Little.
Ms. Albert, you had blankets inside of your house that could have helped someone who's freezing outside.
Objection.
So I'm going to sustain the objection. You can ask a shorter form of that question.
Ms. Albert, you had blankets in the house, correct?
Yes.
You were also lying next to a first responder
Objection.
that morning, correct?
You can answer that.
Yes.
And neither you nor your husband came outside to help Johnny.
We did not go outside because we had no idea what was going on outside. We were sound asleep until my sister came into my bedroom.
No further questions.
Okay. Mr. Lally?
Thank you, Your Honor. With regard to phone calls from your sister Jennifer McCabe that morning, shortly after 6 a.m., did those phone calls wake you up?
No,
Did you answer those phone calls?
No.
Did you speak to Jennifer McCabe on the phone prior to her, or at any point on that morning prior to her coming into your room?
I did not.
And you were shown something that's a cell bright extraction report, correct?
Yes.
And not just that specific one, but have you ever seen any cell bright extraction report before in your life?
No.
Fair to say you don't know how to interpret the data that's on there?
No.
Fair to say that you don't know whether or not an answered call or something that's listed as answered was something that was actually answered or went to voicemail.
Correct.
Now, with regard to your dog, Chloe, following that incident in May of 2022, what, if anything, did you and your husband do with regard to the person that had been bitten?
Well, we had gone over to their house to apologize for what had happened and, offered to pay any bills, that they may have had for any injury to the dog or anything. And then after that, we just decided that we thought the best thing to do would be to try to rehome it because I just didn't want something like that to happen again.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what are the steps that you took in the process of rehoming your dog?
Well, initially I had called a bunch of shelters and they were pretty much telling me that it would be hard to rehome her if she was dog aggressive and they would probably have to put her down. I didn't want to do that. The family, we love the dog, and so I did not want to do that. So I reached out to the woman in Texas who we got the dog from to see if she could help. And she said, she couldn't take it back, but she would try to help me out. So she ended up finding a woman who lived in Vermont. I think she lived alone. She had a big property. It seemed like a good fit. She wanted to take Chloe, and we made arrangements. And I went and met this woman halfway, and I gave her Chloe.
And what, if any, conversations or contact have you had with that woman in Vermont since rehoming your dog?
For a few months after
Objection, Your Honor.
So not the substance of it, but
Have you had contact with the woman in Vermont?
yes, I did for a few months, back and forth.
Now, with reference to Chloe, when your sister Jennifer McCabe comes into your bedroom hysterical that morning of January 29th, was Chloe in the room at the time?
Yes.
Now, you were asked some questions about the evening or the early morning when people had come from the waterfall back to your home, correct? Mm-hmm. And at some point, you were cleaning, and Mr. Higgins and your husband were out of your line of sight. Is that correct?
Yes.
How long a period of time were we talking?
It wasn't very long, a couple minutes. I wasn't watching where everybody was and what everybody was doing.
Fair to say, relatively short period of time.
Yes. Yeah.
I have nothing further.
okay.
Briefly, Your Honor.
Okay. So you need to take this down, sir. Thank you. There was something that was just up there. Go ahead.
Ms. Albert, you never received any voicemails from Jennifer McCabe on January 29th video.
Not that I'm aware of.
You also have never produced, pursuant to our request, any documentation about the whereabouts of Chloe.
The objection sustained. I'm going to strike that question. Disregard the question. Well, questions aren't evidence, so we can leave it on the record, but the objection sustained.
You've never turned over any information about the location of Chloe since the pendency of this case, have you?
Objection, Your Honor, may we approach?
I'm just going to sustain the objection.
Have you ever provided information about the whereabouts of Chloe to the Commonwealth in this case?
Yes, I believe I have.
You have.
I believe so.
When did you do that?
Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes.
No further questions.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Ms. Albert, you are all set.
Thank you.
Your next witness, Mr. Lally?
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth call, excuse me, Mr. Brian Albert to the stand.
Do you solemnly swear the understanding of the court jury in the case now hearing to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do.
All right, whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Your Honor, and good afternoon to the jury.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name?
Sure, it's Brian, last name Albert, A-L-B-E-R-T.
And where do you live, sir?
I live in Norwood, Massachusetts.
And how long have you lived in Norway?
Approximately a year.
And who, if anyone, you live in Norway with?
My wife, Nicole, and my son, Brian, and my son, Brendan.
Can I ask you just a little bit about your family as far as, let me start with yourself and your wife, Nicole. How long have the two of you been married?
Approximately 29 years.
And were you together for a period of time prior to getting married?
Yes, we've known each other since we were 13, 14 years old.
And do you have any siblings, sir?
I do.
And how many siblings do you have?
I have 5 brothers and 1 sister.
And if you could, just as far as, are you the oldest?
I'm the oldest of 7, yes.
And as far as your brothers and sisters are concerned, what are their names, and if you could rank them sort of by age?
Sure, the next sibling after me is my sister Kathleen. Then I have a brother Chris,
a brother Kevin, a brother Keith, a brother Brendan, and a brother Timmy.
And you and your wife, Nicole, do you have children of your own?
Yes,
And how many children do you have?
5.
And how old are they?
So my oldest daughter is 29. My son Brian is 25. My son Brendan turns 23 today. And I have twins, we have twins that are 20 years old. Caitlin's 28, I'm sorry, I said 29.
Now, prior to living at your address in Norwood, where did you live before that?
Canton, Mass.
And how long have you lived in Canton?
Approximately, in the house on Fairview Road, approximately 11 years.
And in total, about how long have you been a resident in Canton before moving to Norwood?
Approximately 45 years.
And that address, that's 34 Fairview Road, is that right?
Yes.
And what, if any, relationship did that home or that residence have to your family before you and your wife and your kids moved in?
My parents had lived at that residence prior to us.
So you spent some of your childhood in that house as well?
Yes.
And do you work, sir?
I did, retired now, retired.
What did you retire from?
The Boston Police Department.
And how long were you a member of the Boston Police Department?
Approximately 30 years.
And within the Boston Police Department, were you assigned to any sort of specific unit or special duties?
My last assignment, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes. My last assignment was the Boston Police Fugitive Unit.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to January 28th, 2022. Do you recall that date?
Yes.
And do you recall what day of the week that was?
The 28th, I believe, was a Friday.
And when you first sort of got up on the 28th, where were you with that?
On the 28th, I was in New York City.
And why had you gone to New York?
So I went to New York for a funeral of a New York City police officer who was killed in the line of duty.
And about what time or what day did you go down to New York for that?
We went down the day before, so I believe that was Thursday.
Do you recall how it was that you got down there?
Yes, I flew to New York.
And when you say we, who, if anyone, went with you on that trip to New York?
I flew with a friend and a coworker named Eddie Hernandez.
So another Boston police officer?
Yes.
And down in New York at that funeral, were there other members of law enforcement that you knew were familiar with and working?
Yes, there were thousands of police officers that went to the funeral.
And included within those people, you mentioned you have a brother Kevin, is that correct?
Yes,
Is he a police officer as well?
he is.
And where is he?
He's a detective in Canton, Massachusetts.
And was he down at this funeral as well?
He was.
And do you know a gentleman by the name of Brian Higgins?
Yes.
And was Brian Higgins at this funeral service as well?
Yes, he was.
And how is it that you know Brian Higgins?
So I know Brian Higgins initially from work, a professional relationship. I've known him known of him for 10 or 15 years. And then the past few years, more recently, we worked together on a closer basis, and I became better friends with him.
And fair to say that when you became better friends with him, you also sort of socialized with him outside of work?
Yes.
Now, as far as your return trip from New York, what, if anything, happened with him?
On the return trip from New York, we drove back.
Why did you drive versus fly back from New York?
So that weekend there was anticipated snowstorm, and I believe the flight that we were taking with JetBlue may have even been canceled. And Brian Higgins was leaving in a vehicle that morning, so we ended up driving, or after the funeral, we ended up driving with him.
And so it's yourself, Mr. Higgins, and then who, if anyone else, went with you on the drive back to Massachusetts?
Eddie Hernandez and my brother Kevin.
And when you arrived back in Massachusetts, where was it sort of specifically that you went first?
I initially went to Charlestown to pick up my vehical.
Where was your vehicle parked in Charleston?
It was at a police station, Charlestown Station. It's a satellite station located in Charlestown.
And that was in reference to proximity to the airport, is that correct?
Yes.
So that would have been Logan that you flew out of and intended to fly back into?
Logan Airport, yes.
And after you were dropped off with your vehicle, what kind of vehicle was that?
That was a Ford Edge,
Was that a personal vehicle or work vehicle?
work vehicle.
And so you get dropped back off at your work vehicle. Where did you go?
So from Charlestown, I drove back towards the Canton area, and I met Brian Higgins at a restaurant bar called the Hillside.
Is that in Canton as well?
I believe so. It's on the Canton-Milton line. I believe it sits in Canton.
And what was the purpose of you and Mr. Higgins going?
After the drive home, he asked if I wanted to get some food and stop off, and I said yes.
And if you know about what time was it that you got to the Hillside with Mr. Higgins?
I want to say around 9:30, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure.
When you arrived there, what did you do?
So we went into the establishment and had a drink and hung out for a while.
And did you order any food there?
I did not. I believe Brian did, though.
And while you were at the Hillside with Mr. Higgins, what, if any, communication did you receive from your wife, Nicole?
So around that time, I talked to my wife, I think more than once, and she had let me know that her and a few people were at another location in Canton, and she had asked if I wanted to come by and see them.
What was that other location?
That other location was the Waterfall.
Is that an establishment you were familiar with?
Yes,
You've been there before several times?
I had been there before, yes.
And so you drove then from the Hillside to the Waterfall?
Yes.
About how long a drive is that?
Maybe 7 minutes, between less than 10 minutes.
And so as you're going on that drive, the snow that was anticipated coming in, had that anything related to that started yet?
No, at that time, I don't recall any snow.
And in relation to the waterfall, where did you park?
In the parking lot for the waterfall, which is adjacent to the door to go inside. So it's to the left if you're looking at the building from Washington Street.
And when you come into, now, when you left the hillside, Mr. Higgins stayed there?
Yes, he stayed.
And when you came into the waterfall, who, if anyone, was there?
So when I walked in, I saw my wife, my oldest daughter, Caitlin. I saw my brother, Chris, his wife, Julie, my brother-in-law, Matt, and my sister-in-law, Jen.
And your brother-in-law, Matt, and your sister-in-law, Jen, their last name is McCabe, is that right?
Yes.
And if you could, just explain to the jury sort of how you were related as far as what marriage you are.
So my brother Chris's wife is Julie, and then Nicole's sister is Jen, and then Jen's husband is Matt McCabe.
And is it fair to say that you've probably known Jennifer McCabe about as long as you've known your wife, Nicole?
Yes, and she was a little kid, maybe 6, 7 years old.
And you see these people, and where are they sort of situated in the one?
So there was a high top table kind of in the front area as you walk in, kind of in the middle of the room, and everybody was just kind of around the high top table.
And what, if anything, was there as far as live entertainment at the waterfall that night?
There was a band playing there.
And with reference to the people that you've just spoken, as far as your wife and your daughter specifically, were they at the high top table closer to the band or further away?
So they were on the side of the table that's, I guess, closer to the door as you come in. And then there were other people on the opposite side of the table that was closer to the bar area.
And after you came into the waterfall, went up to the group of your family, what did you order anything? What did you do there?
Yeah, I kind of just said hi to everybody. I don't recall exactly, but I'm sure I ordered a drink. And then just kind of hung out with family and friends.
And following your arrival, who, if anyone else, showed up and eventually sort of joined your group?
There was another couple at the table. I don't know if they were there initially when I walked in, but there was another couple at the table whom I believed were there before I got there, but I just don't know what their names were.
And do you know how they were related to your group?
I don't. I think they're friends with Chen and Matt, but I'm not 100% sure.
And where were they situated in reference to where your wife and your daughter were?
So they were, I believe, to the right of this pretty large high top table.
So toward the other end of the table?
Yes.
And if you recall, what were you drinking that night?
I don't recall. I usually drink beer, Mick Ultra, but I can't remember that night what I was drinking.
Now, following your arrival there and you meet up with your family, were there other friends or family that eventually showed up at this establishment and joined your group?
Yes.
And who were they, sir?
So after I was there, maybe about a half hour, Brian Higgins arrived at the location.
And if you recall, what, if any, sort of communication did you have with Mr. Higgins, or how did Mr. Higgins know to come to the waterfall specifically?
Because while we were at the hillside, I had mentioned that I was going to be leaving to go to the waterfall to see my family who was already there, and I invited him to come by if he wanted to.
And at any point in time, sort of throughout the course of the day, yourself and Mr. Higgins, you had each other's sort of information and cell numbers, things like that?
Yes.
And at any point in time throughout the course of the day or the evening, did you have occasion to text or phone call or anything with Mr. Higgins?
Yes.
Now, after Mr. Higgins arrives, who, if anyone else, came into Waterfall and joined you?
Probably after about a half hour later from Brian Higgins arriving, John O'Keefe came into the waterfall with the defendant.
And that would have been probably about 11 o'clock, is that correct?
Yes.
And John O'Keefe, if you could tell the jury, well, first, did you know John O'Keefe?
So I knew John O'Keefe, but not well. I had only met him 2 times prior to that night. But I knew him to be a Boston cop, and I knew of him, and I knew some things about him.
And as far as the Boston Police Department, it's a fairly large department, would you agree with that?
Yes.
And about how many members or how many people are on Boston Police?
Depending on the year, I mean, sometimes it's upwards of 2,000.
And through the course of your work over the decades that you worked with the Boston Police, did you ever work with or have any professional sort of interaction with John O'Keefe?
No, I don't remember working with him directly within the Boston Police Department.
Were you aware of sort of what his role was or what he did within the Boston Police?
Yes, I knew where he worked.
And where did you work?
I believe he worked at the SORI unit, which is the sex offender registry unit.
And you mentioned just briefly before that you had heard of Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Yes.
And what is it that you had heard about?
Well, I knew him to be a friend of my sister-in-law Jen and her husband Matt. I knew him to be a friend of my brother Chris and my sister-in-law Julie. I knew him to be a friend of my brother Kevin's. I've heard his name mentioned multiple times, and I knew that he had a horrible couple tragedies in his family, and I knew that he stepped up and decided to take care of his niece and his nephew when they tragically lost their parents.
And how would you sort of describe your relationship with John O'Keefe at this time, January 28, 2022?
Although I didn't know him well, I considered him to be a friend, and our relationship was very, very good, cordial, and I considered him to be somebody that I could hang out with and have a good time with.
Now, you mentioned that Mr. O'Keefe walked in around 11 o'clock to the waterfall with the defendant. For clarity purposes, you're referring to Karen Reed, is that correct?
Yes.
And do you see Ms. Reed in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Could you just identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing she's wearing?
Sure, she's a female at the table in front of me with a black top on, long sleeve.
Just as a record of identification sent by the
Yes.
Now, with regard to Ms. Reed, had you met Ms. Reed prior to that date of January 28th?
I believe I had met her one time a week prior.
And do you recall any specifics about that meeting or how it is that you came to meet her about a week prior?
I do.
And if you could explain to the jury what those circumstances were.
Sure. I met her at the Hillside. I believe she was there with John a week prior.
And as far as your interaction with her on that particular evening, anything significant stand out to you?
No.
Now, when they came in, and by day, I'm sorry, I mean Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed came into the waterfall, where did they go in relation to where you were sort of situated at the high top?
So I don't remember them actually walking in the front door. I remember them being in my general area at some point. And they went towards the other side of the table where my sister-in-law, Jen, and my brother-in-law, Matt, were standing.
And at some point, did either or both of them make their way down towards your side of the table, your side of the table, excuse me, and what, if any, interaction did you have with them?
Yes, I remember having an interaction, or more than one interaction with John. Came over to say hello, and we had some conversation. Not for too long, but yes.
Do you remember anything specific about that conversation or anything stand out to you?
No, I think we were talking mostly about work. I think he let me know that the sergeant, I guess, that worked in his unit was leaving or left or transferred. And, he was jokingly saying that I should try to get a job over at where he works.
And as far as the defendant, Ms. Reed, what, if any, conversation or interaction did you have?
I don't remember having any interaction with her whatsoever.
Now, as far as when Mr. O'Keefe came over, what, if anything, did you observe as far as what he was wearing, clothing, anything like that?
I don't really remember what he was wearing for clothing. I believe he had a baseball hat on. Other than that, I can't remember his clothing.
And specifically, do you recall anything as far as like a winter jacket or a big coat or anything like that?
I can't say. I wasn't really paying attention to what he was wearing. I don't know.
And as far as just his general features, as far as what you could observe, what, if any, sort of injuries or anything did you observe on his person at that time?
I observed no injuries at that time.
And over the course of the evening, you had a couple of interactions with Mr. O'Keefe, is that correct?
Yeah, I believe we talked a few times, kind of hung out, stood next to each other for a while, like you normally would do at a bar restaurant.
And is the band playing while this is going on, is that correct?
Yes, the band was there. I believe they took a break here and there, but they were there for the night.
Now, Mr. Albert, how would you describe sort of the general mood or demeanor of the group while you were at the waterfall that evening?
In one word, it would be fun. Everybody was in a great mood. People were getting along. It was friends and family, and it just seemed like a great night.
And do you recall about what time things started to wind down or things started to sort of end for the evening?
I believe the band stopped playing probably, close to 12, and things started winding down, a little before 12.
And if you know, from the group that you just described at the high top table that you were a part of, what was sort of the order in which people left the establishment, starting with first?
So I believe the first to leave was myself, my wife Nicole, my daughter Caitlin, and Brian Higgins left at that time as well.
And had anybody left from your group prior to when, I'm sorry, so the bar starts to wind down around 12, correct?
Yes.
Prior to the bar winding down, had anybody from your group left before that?
I didn't remember or notice that. I'm not sure.
And so the first to sort of leave from your group when the bar's winding down is yourself, Mr. Higgins, your wife, and your daughter?
Yes.
And when you exit the establishment, where do you go?
Into the parking lot to my vehicle.
Let me take it back just for a moment back into the waterfall. During the course of the evening, what, if any, conversation was had by you or amongst the group that you observed as far as where to go next or what were you doing following the waterfall?
Okay, so there was some conversation relative to people going to my brother's sub shop, which is across the street, and he was maybe going to make some pizzas for people if they were hungry. So that was discussed.
And did that end up happening?
No, some people didn't want to go over there, and for whatever reason, it just didn't happen.
And beyond that, was there anything else that was discussed as far as where to go after the waterfall?
Yes.
And what was that?
So it ended up being my son Brian's 23rd birthday. So at 12 o'clock, he would be 23. So there was some discussion about if anybody wanted to go by the house to kind of say happy birthday to him. And I know my wife Nicole mentioned it to Jen and Matt, and it was said, I believe, in the group where we were standing.
And so was that sort of an open invitation that was extended to pretty much anybody that was around the high top table?
Yeah, sure. Anybody that was there was welcome to come by if they wanted to.
And as far as you knew, as far as awareness of who was coming over to your house at 34th Fairview, who from the group were you aware of coming over?
I don't really remember the responses. I don't think I knew for sure if anybody was going to come, except Brian Higgins said he would come by.
And he had left around the same time as you?
Yes.
And had Brian Higgins been to your house before?
I believe he was at my house for a high school graduation party.
And high school graduation probably in spring, is that correct?
It would have been the summer prior to that time. So my twins were graduating high school, and we had something at the house, and it was spring, summer of the year prior.
And around that time, so that would have been 2021, is that correct?
Yes.
So around that time, there were still sort of vestiges or whatever of COVID pandemic, is that correct?
Yes, actually, I was just getting over, I think.
And so where was this graduation party at your house? Was that inside your house or outside your house or something?
It was actually out back. It was more of a cookout type thing.
And so as far as you can recall, prior to January 28, 2022, had Mr. Higgins been physically sort of inside your house or anything beyond using that?
Besides that graduation party, I don't believe he had ever been at my house. I'm sure he walked into the house, to use the bathroom or something that day, but I didn't really notice, whether he went in there or not.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, there's just a couple of very short clips that I'd like to publish with this witness in reference to what's been marked as Exhibit 53, video of the waterfall. And Ms. Gilman, with reference to channel 3, if I could have the fourth video down. And Ms. Gilman, if I could ask you to fast forward to 18 minutes and 50 seconds. Now, Mr. Albert, directing your attention up to the screen to your right here. Do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that to be?
The waterfall.
And this is, at least according to the timestamp, about 11:57 p.m. on the 28th. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what's up there is that, to the best of your recollection, a fair and accurate portrayal of what the inside of the waterfall looked like, absent sort of the quality of the video.
Yes.
And sir, I believe there should be a laser pointer on the desk before you. If you just press that button and point at the screen. What I'm going to ask you to do is, if you could draw the jury's attention to who, if anyone, within this sort of still frame of the video that you recognize, if any.
With the time band across the top there, I can see some people around the table that we were standing, which would be this table area here. Tough for me to say from here who everybody is. I believe that's Brian Higgins there, but I'm not 100%.
Ms. Gilman, if you could play this, and what I'm going to ask you to ultimately play is up to the 19 minutes and 58 seconds. Ms. Gilman, if you could pause it there. Now, Mr. Albert, from what you observe up there, as far as the door that you came in and came out of on that evening, do you see generally where that door is?
Yes.
And if you could direct the jury's attention to where on the video screen it is.
Doors this way.
And from just prior to when this video went out, stopped at the 11:57 and 50-second mark, you see a group sort of making their way towards that front door, is that correct?
Yes.
And from this vantage point, are you able to recognize any of the people in that group that made their way towards it?
Yes, I believe I saw my wife, my daughter here maybe, and then I think I'm over here. But again, it's a little grainy, and I can't really see great from here. And I saw Brian Higgins, but I don't know if he's in here somewhere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you could just press play again for about 30 some odd seconds. Thank you, Ms. Gilman. You could take that down, and then, Ms. Gilman, if I could ask for one other video from channel 1, the second one down. If I could ask you to fast forward that to about 5 minutes and 10 seconds. And ultimately, I'm going to ask you to play it from 5 minutes and 10 seconds to 5 minutes and 50 seconds. And if you could press play now. Thank you, sir. Now, generally speaking, what was just played up on the screen, Mr. Albert, do you recognize what that is?
Yeah, it looks like the exit of the waterfall, and we're kind of walking out.
The same group that was walking to the front door, now walking out the front door and into the parking lot.
Yes, and I believe there was somebody else there. I don't know if it was somebody from the band or it looks like a different person out front there.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Gilman, you can take that. Now, Mr. Albert, when you get to the parking lot, you get in the vehicle and you drive to your house, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and specifically, you're the one driving, is that correct?
Yes.
And who is in your car with you on the drive back to your house?
My wife Nicole and my daughter Caitlin.
And about how far a drive is it from the waterfall to your house?
I would say 5 minutes.
And the weather, as far as when you walk out, get in the car, and then start driving, what, if anything, had changed about the weather from the time you came into the waterfall to the time you came out?
Yeah, so it had started snowing a little bit more heavily. You can kind of see that on that second video. So the ground was beginning to be, coated, it looked like.
So coating on the ground, as you were driving, could you still sort of see the blacktop of the roadway?
I believe so, yes.
Now, you get to your house, and what, if anything, happens sort of as you're coming into your driveway?
It looks like that. It had looked like Brian had gotten there first, Brian Higgins, and he was backing out, so I could pull my car in.
And as far as the vehicle that Mr. Higgins was driving on that evening from the waterfall, was that the same vehicle that he had driven with you back from New York?
No.
And what kind of vehicle was the one that he was driving back from New York, and what kind of vehicle was the one he was driving that night?
So the one back from New York, he was driving a full-size pickup truck. I'm not sure what make or model, but it had a cab on the back, and I believe it's gray. And then that night later in the night at the waterfall, he had a Jeep Wrangler vehicle that I believe is white, but I'm not 100%.
So he had arrived at your house before you, is that correct?
Yes.
And you said it looked like he had done something to the driveway?
He may have skimmed. Yeah, he had a plow on his truck, and I think he may have plowed the driveway and then pulled out, and then we pulled in.
And as far as vehicles at your house, around this time, January 22, between yourself, your wife, kids, how many vehicles did you have?
I believe 3.
And what type of vehicles, and who was sort of the primary driver with regard to those?
So I had we had a Ford Explorer, a Cadillac SUV. It's a smaller SUV that my wife Nicole drives, and the Ford Edge that I already spoke of, and I believe we had one more vehicle that one of my kids drove at that time, and I'm just trying to remember. It might have been an Escape, maybe a Ford Escape. Someone could have had that. Someone could have had that at school, so I don't remember if it was there that night or not.
All the vehicles were essentially like SUV type vehicles.
Yes, we didn't own any sedans or any cars.
Now, as far as when you pull into the driveway, the house at 34 Fairview had the 2-car garage.
Yes.
And is the garage something that you or other members of your family would utilize as far as parking vehicles?
No. So unfortunately, we didn't use the garage a lot because we kind of used it for storage, and we had a lot of stuff out there, so we very seldom used it.
And if you recall, as you're pulling into the driveway, did you pull into the left side, the right side, or?
I believe I pulled in on the left side of the driveway.
And you mentioned that Mr. Higgins had sort of scooped with the plow like in the driveway and then parked on the street. Do you recall where in relation to your house or your driveway he parked?
So no, I don't remember where Brian Higgins parked. I remember him pulling out so I could pull in, and then I didn't really see where he parked.
And you then go into your house, is that correct?
Yes.
And are all of you, and by all of you I mean yourself, your wife, your daughter, and Mr. Higgins all sort of coming in around the same time?
Basically, yes.
When you come into your house, do you recall how many doors in front of the house are there?
So we have 2 front doors.
And one would be sort of by some steps, is that correct?
There's actually steps on both doors, but one of them is, I guess, considered the front door with a large set of steps.
And they would be sort of brick steps, is that right?
Yes.
And that leads into a foyer area of the house?
Yes.
And the other door, where does that lead?
So the other door opens up right into the we call it the family room, but right into the family room den area.
And do you recall specifically which door you utilized on that evening to go into the house?
I believe I went in the door on the right, which goes into the den. Not really sure what other doors people used.
And when you came into the house, who, if anyone, was present beyond the people that you would come in with?
So my son Brian was home. He had 2 friends, I believe Julie and Sarah.
And these were people that you had known as friends of your son from prior vacation?
I didn't know Sarah. I had met Julie once or twice.
And as you were walking in, who, if anyone else beyond your son and his 2 friends, was there?
And my nephew Colin.
Maybe Colin Albert, is that correct?
Yes, Chris and Julie's son Colin.
And about how old was Colin around then?
I believe he was just about 18. 17, 18. He's in high school.
So you're still in high school at the time?
Yes.
And when you walk in, where was Colin in relation to your son and the 2 girls that he was with?
He was just kind of standing in the kitchen with Brian and the 2 girls. Brian and the 2 girls were at the kitchen table, and Colin was just kind of standing there.
And from the time that you arrived home, how long was Colin at your house?
No more than 5 minutes.
And where did he go?
He left. He just said he was getting picked up.
We said he was getting picked up, and a few minutes later he left your house.
Yes, I went and used the bathroom. I came out, and he was gone.
Now, at some point subsequent to that, who, if anyone else, arrived or showed up at your house?
After Colin left the house?
Yes.
Nobody else arrived at the house.
Your sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, Matthew McCabe, at some point, did they come by?
Yes, I thought you were referring to after they showed up.
So my question is, do you know whether or not when Jennifer McCabe and Matthew McCabe arrived at your house, was Colin still there?
I don't know if he was still there or not. I believe he left before they came, but I'm not 100%.
So So you come home and you go to use the restroom, is that correct?
Yes.
And when you go to use the restroom, Colin's there, correct?
Yes.
And the caves are not?
They are not.
When you come back from the restroom, Colin's not there?
Yes, Colin was gone.
And the caves are there?
No, I don't believe they had arrived yet.
Okay. So they arrived sometime after Colin had left.
Yes.
And over the course of that evening of the 28th into the early morning of the 29th, did anybody else come into your house, or did anybody else come into your house at any point?
No.
Now, in addition to yourself, your wife, and your son, did you have any pets at that time?
Yeah, yes, we did.
Okay. And what kind of pets did you have?
We had a dog.
And what kind of dog was that?
So it was a German Shepherd mix.
And what was the name of the dog?
Chloe.
And how long had you and your family had the dog?
We had Chloe for approximately, at that time, maybe 6 or 7 years.
Do you recall how you got the dog or where you got the dog from?
The dog was from a shelter in Dallas, Texas, actually.
So essentially a rescue dog, is that correct?
Yes, rescue dog.
And when you got home after you went to the bathroom, what, if anything, did you do with reference to the dog clothes?
At some point, I went upstairs to grab the dog and let her out back to use the bathroom.
And so when you would take the dog out, or when anybody would take the dog out to use the bathroom, how would that be accomplished? So what I'm asking is, would the dog be on a leash, or would it be let out in the yard? Or...
No, so the backyard's fenced in, so I would open up the back door and she can go out, use the bathroom, and come back inside.
So the entirety of your backyard, that's a fenced-in backyard, is that correct?
Yes.
And beyond that fence, as far as the abutting, what sort of abuts the back of your property?
So behind the back fence, there's a railroad track. I believe it's a commuter rail that's behind the fence.
And is there any sort of opening or way to open the back of that fence to get in sort of any wooded area between your house and the tracks?
Yes, there's a gate back there.
And the gate, as far as when you let the dog out in the back that night, did you stay with the dog while the dog was outside?
I stayed at the doorway, and the dog went to the bathroom and then ran right back in.
So about how long was the dog outside?
She was out back for maybe 2 or 3 minutes.
So went outside, went to the bathroom, came back in?
Yes.
And when the dog came back inside the house, where did the dog go?
So the dog kind of walked around in the kitchen for a few minutes, and then I took her upstairs.
And when you took her upstairs, where upstairs did you take her?
So the dog likes to sleep in our room, mine and my wife's room. So a lot of times she would go up there on her own. Sometimes I would walk her up, and I walk her up to our bedroom.
And at any point in time for the remainder of that evening or the early morning, did the dog go outside at all?
No.
And you mentioned that there are train tracks that run sort of close to your property, is that correct?
Yes.
And is that just the commuter rail, or does the Acela go by, or anything else?
I believe there is, in addition to the commuter rail, there's other trains that use that track, yes.
And how often, sort of on a daily basis, do trains go by your house on Fairview Road?
So it depends, I guess, schedule-wise, if it's the middle of the week or if it's the weekend. But, on any given day, they can go by 5 or 6 times, morning, more towards the rush hour times, morning, at night, and then sometimes at night and sometimes during the day. So really all day and night.
And when the trains go by, about how loud is that as far as from your house?
So it's loud, although having lived there for a period of time, I feel like at least I'm kind of immune to the sound. I don't really hear it as much anymore.
So something essentially based on how long you've lived there, you really don't even hear it anymore?
Not really, no.
Now, you let the dog out, you bring the dog back upstairs, and then where did you go from there?
So after I brought the dog up, I just came back down and hung out with everybody else.
And where within your house was everybody else sort of situated?
So everybody was in the kitchen, and then we have a connecting dining room, but it's opened. It's only, a difference of 5 feet. And then we have the family room den that's adjacent to the kitchen. But they're all close proximity.
So the kitchen and the dining room are sort of the same room, is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as what if anything is between the kitchen and dining room and the living room that you were talking about?
So there's a wall, but there's a doorway. So there's really no barrier to go from the kitchen dining room into the family room.
So somebody's standing in the family room and somebody's standing in the kitchen dining area, they can sort of see each other?
Yes.
Now, in the kitchen area where everybody was, or in the kitchen dining room area, do you recall sort of where people were and what they were doing around that time?
Yeah, I think people were just sitting around, having drinks. Someone had a speaker, and they were listening to music and just talking and hanging out.
And as far as the sort of group and sort of the overall mood or demeanor of the group back at the house, how would you describe that?
Pleasant, fun. Everybody was having a good time. We were wishing Brian a happy birthday, and everything was going great.
And at any point in time, while this was all going on, did you, other than your situation with the dog, was there any point in time where you were not with the group in the kitchen dining area?
No, I was there basically for the whole night, except I think at one point I may have shown Brian Higgins some photos that were in my son's room that were upstairs.
And what kind of photos were we talking?
So my son Jack, who's one of the twins, was in the Marines, or is in the Marines, and we had put some plaques and some stuff in his room upstairs. And Brian Higgins was prior military, as am I, and I thought he would want to see the photos, so I had him look at them.
And for that period of time that you were outside of sort of the kitchen dining room area looking at the photos with Mr. Higgins, how long a period of time were we talking?
Very, very quickly, 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes.
Now, at some point over the course of that morning, things started to sort of wind down at your home. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And about what time was that things started to wind down, people started to leave?
I think Brian left at around 1:30. I believe he was the first to leave. And then others left after that.
When you say others left after that, after Mr. Higgins left your house, where did you go?
So after Brian left, I had gone upstairs and hung out and watched TV up in my bedroom.
You had a long day that day, is that fair to say?
Yes, I had the funeral in New York that morning. We had the long drive back, and we had been out, and now we're hanging out at my house, and it had been a long day, yes.
And so, at any point in time, after you went upstairs after Mr. Higgins left, did you come back downstairs at all?
Yes, I think I popped back down at one point just to see kind of how long people were going to be there, and then went back up.
And when you popped back down, how many people were still there?
I think Jen and Matt were still there, and the two, Brian's two friends were still there, and my daughter Caitlin.
Now, as far as beyond Mr. Higgins when he left, was there any other occasion that you can recall where somebody from your house went outside and then came back?
Yes.
And who was that?
So while we were hanging out, I believe the girl Julie Nagel's brother came to the house. I never saw him, but I could hear them saying that he was out front. And I think Julie Nagel had walked outside to talk to him.
And at some point after she walked outside, she came back inside, is that correct?
Yes.
And about how long a period of time, if you know, was she outside for?
I didn't really pay attention to how long it was. I don't think it was that long.
And as far as the outside of your house, after you had let Chloe out and back in, what, if any, observations did you make outside of your house? Did you look out? Did you see anything outside of the house?
Just that we have windows in the back of the kitchen area. You could just see that it was snowing.
Is that sort of like a bay window in the kitchen?
Yes, it's a large bay window in the kitchen.
And when you look out the bay window in the kitchen, what part of your property does that face?
So it's the backyard. You can see the backyard. The bulkhead is right under that bay window, and you pretty much have a view of the whole backyard if it's in the daytime. But it was obviously a little dark.
So can you see the front of the house at any part of the front of the house when you're looking out the bay window?
No,
So at any point in time over the course of the evening, did you look out front to see anything out in front of your house?
no,
Now, at any point in time over the course of the evening, did you hear anything from front of the house, the back of the house, anywhere around the house that drew your attention outside?
no,
Now, at any point in time during the evening, did you know or did you become aware of either John O'Keefe or the defendant Karen Reed coming over to your house?
no,
And at no point in time over the course of that evening or the early morning there, did John O'Keefe or Karen Reed physically come into your house?
John O'Keefe and Karen Reed never entered my house.
And so you go up to bed, and the group is still sort of downstairs, is that correct?
Yes,
And at some point, your wife Nicole, you share a bedroom with, did she come upstairs?
yes.
And do you know about what time that was?
It was probably 2-ish. Not exactly sure, but around 2 or 2 o'clock.
And the doors to your house, as far as the front doors and the back doors, what is sort of the situation with regard to locking the doors before everybody goes to bed?
Can you rephrase that?
With when you lived at 34 Fairview Road, there were a number of doors to the house, including 2 doors in the front, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how was that? Let me ask you this: would it be unusual for the front doors of your house to remain unlocked overnight?
No.
Is that something that happened on occasion where people were supposed to lock the doors but didn't lock the doors?
Yes, from time to time, the doors, people would just forget to lock them, or we just didn't lock them.
And so your wife comes up to your bedroom about 2 a.m. or so. As far as you knew, was everybody else had left the house at that point?
Yes,
And you're up for a period of time with your wife, is that correct?
yes.
And over the course of that time, so sort of following 2 o'clock in the morning, do you recall any sort of phone call or phone conversation with Mr. Higgins or anybody else?
No.
And at some point you fall asleep, do you recall about when that was?
I don't, but it was obviously after 2 because that's when she came upstairs. We watched TV and kind of hung out together for a while, and then went to sleep.
And the dog, Chloe, was she up in the room where you had brought her up before?
Yes,
She was there overnight, is that correct?
yes.
Now, turning your attention to later on that morning or beginning of that morning, daytime morning of January 29th. Obviously, at some point you wake up, correct?
Yes.
And what is it that wakes you up on that morning?
I was awoken that morning to my sister-in-law, Jen, had burst into my room.
And do you know about what time that was?
It was early in the morning between 6 and 6:30, I would say.
And fair to say that's not a normal occurrence?
No.
And when she burst into your room, can you describe her demeanor or sort of how she appeared when she first came in?
She was very upset, almost hysterical.
And what, if anything, did she say when she came in?
She said something to the effect, John is dead.
Objection.
Next question, please, sustain.
Did you know who she was referring to when she initially comes into your room?
I initially did not.
And at some point during the course of that conversation, does Ms. McCabe make reference to going downstairs?
Yes.
And prior to that, not the content of the conversation, but as far as the length of the conversation, about how long was that length of conversation that occurred in your bedroom between yourself, Ms. McCabe, and your wife?
Probably a minute.
And the demeanor that you described as far as Ms. McCabe was concerned is almost hysterical. Was that continuous throughout that initial conversation?
Yes. She was very upset.
And who, if anyone, did she indicate was downstairs, or why did you go downstairs?
She said that the police.
This I'm going to allow with that foundation.
Go ahead.
She said that the police were downstairs.
And so you went downstairs to talk to them?
Yes.
And when you go downstairs, what do you see when you get to sort of the bottom of the stairs?
I saw a Canton police officer downstairs.
So inside your house at that point?
Yes.
And the door to your house, was it still open or shut or something?
I don't remember.
And the Canton police officer that's inside your home, did you recognize him?
Yes.
And who did you recognize him?
Last name Lank. So Officer Lank.
Was he someone that you were familiar with?
I knew who he was. Yes.
Did you socialize or friends or anything like that?
I didn't socialize with him. I knew him to be a Canton police officer. I had met him, multiple times, and I knew him to know my brother Chris.
And so knew him, essentially what I'm asking, knew him in a professional capacity, personal capacity, or a little bit of both?
I would say more of a professional capacity, and I knew of him, but did not hang out with him socially.
And initially, when you first see Officer Lank, was he by himself, or who, if any, other officers were with him?
I believe initially he was by himself.
Did another officer join yourself and Officer Lank at some point?
Yes, I believe another officer came into the house.
Do you know who that officer is?
I don't.
And as far as them coming into your house, they were welcome in your house? You didn't say get out or close the door or anything like that?
No, of course they were welcome in my house.
And where did you go with the officer, sort of in your house? Where did you spoke with the officer, I'm presuming?
Yes, we spoke in the kitchen area.
And when you're speaking with the officer in the kitchen area, who is there?
So my wife Nicole, her sister Jen, and I believe Jen's husband Matt arrived almost the same time that I came downstairs, maybe a minute after.
And how long a period of time was this conversation that occurred in the kitchen of your house?
I don't remember the exact time. I wouldn't want to guess. I don't remember. He was 10, 15, 20 minutes maybe initially.
And when you say initially, was there a subsequent conversation that occurred after that?
Yes. The Officer Lank returned to the house sometime after that.
And when he returned sometime after that, was he alone, or was there another officer?
I believe that time he was with Lieutenant Gallagher, perhaps.
And were you familiar with Lieutenant Gallagher prior to that one?
I knew who Lieutenant Gallagher was on a professional level. I had not hung out with him on a social level.
And again, they were welcomed into your home, and you spoke with them. Is that correct?
Yes, the second time they were there, they were invited back to the house via a phone call.
And that second conversation within your house, where did that?
Same area, family room, kitchen area.
And if you know about how long a period of conversation was that second come back to the house?
That may have been longer, maybe a half hour.
Now, going back to sort of that initial conversation, as far as, so it's yourself, it's Mr. and Mrs. McCabe, your wife, and then the police, is that correct?
Myself, my wife Nicole, my sister-in-law Jen, her husband Matt had arrived, and the police, yes.
And in between that first speaking with the police and the second time that the police came back to your house, who, if anyone, did you call or notify in regard to the situation that was going on in front of your house?
I called Brian Higgins
Why did you call Brian?
because I think it was important for him to know what was going on and that what had happened.
And as far as you knew with reference to Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Reed, what, if any, relationship, friendship, anything were you aware of between Mr. Higgins and either Mr. O'Keefe or Ms. Reed?
I was not aware too much about a relationship with Brian and either person. Brian had mentioned maybe even that night that he was friendly and knew John. I knew of no relationship between Brian and the defendant.
And following your conversation with Mr. Higgins, who, if anyone else, came over your house?
So Brian Higgins eventually came over to my house, and my sister-in-law Julie also arrived at my house.
And do you know why your sister-in-law Julie came by your house that night?
Yes.
And why was that?
So she has a routine that when it's someone's birthday, she likes to come by and bring like coffee and donuts. So it was Brian's birthday that night. So my sister-in-law Julie was coming by to drop off some donuts and coffee, I think.
And where was Julie when you first saw her that morning?
She was out front in the driveway.
And what, if anything, did you ask Julie to do when you saw her out in the driveway?
I asked her to come inside.
And when she came inside, is that when you informed her of what had happened?
Yes, I don't know if it was necessarily me that informed her, but people that were there were explaining to her what happened. It was a very, very chaotic, unbelievably chaotic morning.
And as far as when that was described to your sister-in-law Julie, how would you describe sort of her demeanor or her reaction to the news regarding Mr. O'Keefe?
Shock. That's how I would describe everybody's reaction that morning, was utter shock. She was upset and looked very, very in shock.
And so the second time that the Canton police officers come back to your home, who was there at that point?
I know I was there for sure. My wife, Nicole, Jen, her husband, Matt. Brian Higgins may have been there at that time. And I'm not sure about Julie. Julie at one point left the house, and I think she came back later in the morning, but so I'm not sure if she was there.
And at some point when your sister-in-law Julie came back to your house, who, if anyone, came to your house with her?
Her husband, my brother Chris, who's her husband.
Was this before or after the second time that the police had been in your house?
I believe they came back after the second time, but I'm not 100% sure. The first time that Julie came with the coffee, the police were not there.
Now, when you first sort of get up and come downstairs and the police they're basically in your doorway, is that correct?
Yes.
Could you see outside as far as what was going on outside at that time?
Not from downstairs, but I had looked out the window after Jen had come up into my room and explained what had happened, and before I went downstairs.
When you looked out your window from your bedroom, what did you see?
I could see at least one police vehicle. I could see that there was something going on out front, and that was about it, and I just went straight downstairs.
At that time that you looked out your window, did you see either an ambulance or a fire truck out there?
I don't remember if I saw an ambulance. There were emergency vehicles out there, but I can't remember exactly which types.
And at any point in time, at that time or subsequent throughout the course of the day, did you go out to that area of your yard where you saw the cruisers and the sort of lights?
No.
And when?
I didn't see that there was a reason to go out to that area. The police had already been in my house. They had already talked to us about what was going on. It was a snowstorm at that point. They were trying to conduct an investigation, and I didn't want to interfere with it or have anything to do with it.